Lovely to see you all. And the prayers. Then I would like to go. Oh, we have that problem again. I would like to go to page 9. Before we go there, I would like to say something about him.
No, he has control.
As you just heard, tomorrow morning we'll have the in-depth meditation as well. And normally I prefer to wrap the in-depth meditation training into these weekend retreats and to use the weekend retreats to explore some of the things that we've been talking about, or to look at something again from a different perspective a little bit later on in that meditation training. And that is exactly what we're going to do this weekend. So on the one hand, we're going to look at, and I will explore them in a moment, the awakening factors, which are both pathways, aspects of our mind that will lead to awakening. And I see you as well. Thank you for coming. But that also, one could say, are enlightened perspectives. It shows something about a wholesome state of mind that gives us intimacy or an intimate perspective of what enlightenment feels like. Yeah. At the same time, tomorrow morning, in the context of the in-depth meditation training, we will start to look at a very deep and not uncontroversial Buddhist meditation that is exchanging one's self-prioritizing to the prioritizing of others and why that works. And what I'm going to try to do this weekend is to wrap these two into each other so that you have, so we can develop courage and trust that it actually works. But it is not a given why that works, and yet it is so important. Yeah. That is why I would like to start with these words of by Shantideva. As in this tradition, in the Indian Tibetan tradition, there is no text as beautiful and as deep as that text. As Shantideva, interestingly enough, both gives argumentation, but also speaks about his own practice. And that is quite rare amongst Buddhist texts. They can often be very scholastic, but Shantideva talks from a very intimate, personal perspective. You can feel from his words that it means something to him. He's talking about himself, and that is what always deeply impresses me. One more thing to add about this, which I think is so important for us as practitioners, is that often these texts are always in the singular, first person. But in a way that does not make any sense. That is not the way we exist. We, as Thich Nhat Hanh so beautifully states it, we inter-exist. Yeah. And that we will come back to. So both as living beings, we are dependent on the existence of other living beings. What is true in a general sense is certainly true for our meditative practice. And there is no development on our own. We develop in between others' community matters. And the most beautiful expression of that are the rebirth stories of the Bodhisattva. Because what you see in these stories, apart from all the great deeds that the Bodhisattva does in different lifetimes, is that these are stories of friendship. In every one of these Jataka stories, in these rebirth stories, you meet the Buddha to be, but always together with people that will later on in that last life form his community. And you can see that it was not a solitary hero moving from life to life. It was a community that moved from life to life, then to perform in the end that ultimate function of turning the wheel of Dharma in this world. And I think as practitioners, especially of the Mahayana tradition, within this organization, it is good to cultivate that sense that we practice together. So that hopefully our karmic paths become connected so that we move from life to life, so that one day we may together as well turn that wheel of Dharma. And if we do a good job, we might as well do this in this very life. That will be the best option of all, as far as I'm concerned. I hope you agree with me. But that is why I changed from the text all the singular first person into plural first person. Yeah, that is the whole point. Yeah. So if you would like to recite it with me, and can you conjure that on Zoom? Yeah. May we be the medicine and the physician for the sick. May we be their nurse until their illness never recurs. With showers of food and drink, may we overcome the afflictions of hunger and thirst. May we become food and drink during times of famine. May we be an inexhaustible treasury for the destitute. With various forms of assistance, may we remain in their presence. May we be a protector for those who are without protectors, a guide for travelers and a boat, a bridge, and a ship for those who wish to cross over. May we be a lamp for those who seek light, a bed for those who seek rest, and may we be a servant for all beings who desire a servant. To all sentient beings, may we be a wish-fulfilling gem, a vase of good fortune, an efficacious mantra, a great medication, a wish-fulfilling tree, and a wish-granting cow. Just as earth and other elements are useful in various ways to innumerable sentient beings dwelling throughout infinite space, so may we be in various ways a source of life for the sentient beings present throughout space until they're all liberated. Just as the Sugatas of old adopted the spirit of awakening, and just as they properly conformed to the practice of the Bodhisattvas, so we ourselves shall generate the spirit of awakening for the sake of the world, and so we ourselves shall properly engage in those practices. Upon gladly adopting the spirit of awakening in this way, intelligent people should thus nurture the spirit in order to fulfill their wish. We take refuge until we are enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By merits of living the Dharma, may we become Buddhas to benefit all transmigratory beings. We take refuge until we are enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By merits of listening to the Dharma, may we become Buddhas to benefit all transmigratory beings. We take refuge until we are enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By our merits of listening to the Dharma, may we become Buddhas to benefit all transmigratory beings. Now our lives are fruitful, human existence is well obtained. Today we have been born into the family of the Buddhas. Now we are children of the Buddha. You have a tank of Tara? Ah, I can't see her. Good. Because, yeah, of course, of course. Yeah. Well, because I thought of this morning when I was thinking about this evening, I thought of quite a funny and informative story that it will be worthwhile to explore. And I finally found where it comes from. Now I forgot the name of the book again. If you want it, I can send it to you later on. I will mail it to you. It's a book by Ajahn Amaro, a Theravada monk that at one point was invited, I think, on the West Coast to assist a Dzogchen retreat, interestingly enough. And he wrote a book on his experiences and what he told in the evenings. And in it, he relates a story of what somehow, somewhere happened in Germany at some time in the context of a teacher whose name he also didn't remember. So I'm not the only one with that problem. So I felt good about that alone. He relates that at one point there's some Tibetan Lama teaching, I think, a practice of the 21 Taras. Tara, the most popular of Buddha forms in Tibet, a female form, interestingly enough, and importantly enough. And so at one point, one of the participants in the retreat says, this practice is very important to me, but I really must know now, does she exist or does she not exist? And according to the story, the Lama goes into silence for a moment and then is smiling as one should do. And he says, you know, Tara knows she's not real. Yeah. And I like that expression because it's for one thing a fantastic answer, um, but it also is a good start of practice. Is to and those of you that train with me, or have trained with me for a while, you know how important humor is. Yeah, yeah. Humor is self-deprecating in a wholesome way, but it also performs a social function. It's very difficult not to laugh when everyone is laughing around you. What does that mean? What does Tara mean when she says, you know, I know that I'm not real? What she means is that the way we appear to each other is unreal. There's something wrong with our perception. Yeah. And that is a burden both on ourselves and our relationships with others. It is the cause of all our troubles. But it also creates a challenge for us because we want to practice with a wrong image of ourselves. And we want to engage ourselves, we want to transform ourselves, but if we don't know who we are, how are we going to accomplish that? That is like driving a car with a manual of a bicycle. That is not a successful approach, without a doubt. Yeah. And that in a very important way is exactly what he is trying to say with this image of Tara. That from our perspective, what we see is not a good guide to navigating anything in our lives. We don't appear even ourselves to ourselves as we truly exist, let alone that we see others in any way that is actually really useful to our behavior. And I would say open the newspapers in the morning and you see how badly we struggle from this. One of the challenges that we face in meditative practice for that reason is that, especially as Westerners, we very often meditate with a sense of force, with a sense of competition, of a motivation of achievement, and none of this works. Yeah. You should. I would say that about half of the emails from the in-depth meditation training that I receive in my inbox are people frustrated. Yeah. I'm meditating and nothing is happening. Yeah. And that nothing is happening comes from the fact that we try to manipulate ourselves into enlightenment rather than to care ourselves into enlightenment. Yeah. So one could say, and that is one of my arguments this weekend, which is very important for me as a meditator myself, of how I navigate my own mind, is that it is much less about doing anything at all rather than seeing. When we see ourselves in a wholesome light, we create a space in which that which is part of us finds its own way. It is very important to remember that in the path descriptions that we have, like how do we move from where we are to Buddhahood, that the central moment of transformation is not a path of having achieved something. It's not a path of doing. It's a path of seeing. One moment before, the world appears to us in an unfortunate way, and all of a sudden, within a single meditative practice, the world appears to us as it exists. And so all of a sudden, our behavior is transformed by different information. Rather than struggling, that struggle will be over. What we see will be a good guidance for our intent. In between, we have to sort of muddle our way around, and that is quite okay. For that, we need lots of humor. Yeah. Yeah. I always say I have one superpower, as they call them in Sanskrit, siddhi, and that is that I always get up one more time than I fall down. That is my real power. And I can tell you I'm an expert in falling down. Yeah. Yeah. No, that is human. Yeah. So Let's start with some of the awakening factors. The awakening factors are 7 aspects of the mind. So the important thing to realize is that you have them in sometimes limited ways, but they tell you something about you. Yeah. And for me, that's very important. The Buddha is not qualitatively different from us. The Buddha is the same type of mind, but without its restrictions. Yeah. And so when we practice the awakening factor, have we practiced in a way doing Buddha? I stole that from actually a theologian that at one point suggested that it would be better to talk about God as a verb rather than a noun. And I think that is a very helpful way of looking at Buddhahood as well. Actually, the great Japanese Master Dogen, as we actually looked at last Tuesday, says exactly that. He says sitting is being Buddha. You do Buddha until you become very good at it. But there's no true separation between us and awakening. Yeah. And so these 7 awakening factors are both a pathway to awakening, but they're also awakening itself. The Buddha has also all 7 of them in perpetuity. Yeah. For example, we have mindfulness, and Buddhas have mindfulness always. But that means we have something that is similar to the Buddha, and that is inspiring. Because it means when you sit in meditation, in the moment you are mindful, you experience something that is similar to the experience of an awakened being. Yeah. It's not the same, but it's similar. And that is encouraging. That means that at that moment, what you see tells you something about what awakening looks like. Yeah. So far, you still with me? Yeah, great. And online? Good. Just checking. Yeah. And so the awakening factors for that reason play a role at every stage of our path. They play a role at the beginning, they play a role in the middle, and they come to fruition when we become enlightened beings. Yeah. And so we will approach them from different ways this weekend. What is also interesting is that they explain in and of themselves how meditation works without doing. They are a self-reinforcing circle. So these seven awakening factors are best practiced as a circle of practice than a developmental program, although it can be approached from that. Does it turn off and on, or is this just my illusions? That's what the yeah, we shall transmit in clear ways. So fixed. Yeah. So just to list them so that you have heard them. The first one is mindfulness. Yeah. And I will explain all of them. We will practice all of them in this weekend, one at a time. Yeah. The second one, very underestimated in the West, actually actively disliked in the West for strange reasons, is investigation. Yeah. The third one is called energy, vriya in Sanskrit. The next one is called joy. Joy is followed by tranquility or pliancy, but we will get there. Followed by absorption, often called concentration, but those that are familiar with me know that I don't like that word. See, even Buddhist monks are allowed to have some dislikes. And the final one, and the first one, is equanimity. Yeah. So, for that reason, in a moment, I would like to start with some equanimity, but for that, we need to understand something. Again, I will highlight that our practice is a practice of seeing rather than doing. Yeah. we will see that seeing builds quite on its own a motivation. We are actually very bad seers. And you will like the story, but I have a good friend that has recently passed away, who was one of England's great painters, a great African nature painter. And he once told me the story that when he was actually a janitor, I think, in a hospital or a university before some professor picked him up and said, "Well, this is not what you're doing. Come to my place, and I will learn you how to make anatomical drawings." And that is the way he became an artist. And he describes, and I retold the story so often that it probably sort of got removed from the original, but who cares? And especially as he's no longer around, he is not, he cannot say anything about it. But he said that the first time he ever tried to paint a tree, he found it surprising that he couldn't. Because we think that a tree consists of some brown and some green. And when you start on a canvas with two colors, what you end up with looks nothing like a tree. When you look deeply, you see that a tree has, an average European tree has dozens of colors. You need the whole palette to make it look like a tree. And he says that he said that he was always very embarrassed by that realization. And we think we see the world as it is. He says even from a normal perspective, we see almost nothing at all. We actually judge, we think about the world. But most of our lives are, are secondhand, one could say. It's thinking about the world rather than experiencing the world. And so that alone, to see that that is the case, builds a motivation. We, like last week, I was in Silicon Valley, of all places. And of course, there people they try to live longer. And that is now the modern thing to do. And when I was teaching at Ocean of Compassion, I said, they should send Elon Musk to me because I will tell him that it doesn't matter if you are unaware of your own existence for 1,000 years or for 10 years. You're not to be present to your existence. When you're not present to your existence, the longevity doesn't matter. Yeah. When unconsciousness does not offer anything, but we all know how that feels. To come to a Friday evening and not to remember anything of the whole week that preceded it, which is painful. And so to see that we have something of an inexplicable value almost, that we are not present to most of the time, would be a good start of one's motivation. Apart from any higher goal, that single fact is terrifying. I often say, like with the minds that we have, even though we live in a consumer society, we are the worst consumers ever. Because if you're never present, how can you get to enjoy the things that you own? That's a waste of your money. That's a waste of your work, of your time. And so it's very important in that sense to start at a very basic lived experience. Because that will motivate you in your daily life. When you notice that your mind is not capable of staying here, no, that creates a strong motivation of wanting to do otherwise. I always say that it is almost regrettable that every instance is too short to know what is inside. Now I'm looking at this room and every moment is different. You are unfolding. And yet every moment that I look at you is way too short to know exactly what I'm seeing. And then it's gone. So it's already too short. We already have too little time to really see what is here, let alone if we are not present to it. And so that is something that we need to see. And when we really see it for ourselves, when we have seen it deeply that this is the case, this provides enormous motivation. Like this is not acceptable. This is not the way I want to live. This is not life at all. So then the question is, why is that the case? I mean, I seem to be, well, I thought that I was aware, and that now turns out to be a bit of a disappointing proposition. How does it happen that I'm so unaware? And then you have to look again. And we will do that in a moment in meditation, where we will see that if you, when you just sit down, you see that the mind, that the world appears to us in a very pre-processed way, that is highly skewed, and that controls our behavior. And in fact, desire and aversion and our perceptions run circles around each other, and they have a hold over our mental behavior. And that is where equanimity plays an enormous role. And I like it for many different reasons, because it is also a beautiful thing to do. Equanimity means to realize that our uninvestigated perceptions are highly skewed. One of my examples is always that when you move into a space, let's say you go to a concert, and there's 1,000 people there, and you look around, and when you really investigate what you are seeing, interestingly enough, even though you don't know anyone, you see people that you like, dislike, or find uninteresting. But how do you know? You have no clue who is there. But your mind has already started to categorize the world in a very egocentric way, categorizing others as objects to be used in one way or another. And that's not nice, and highly incorrect, as we will see later on. And the moment on that basis, our mind impels us to behave in certain ways because we believe it is real. And that is what every starting meditator realizes. Hey, you want to sit down, but your mind has, well, a mind of its own. It does whatever it wants to do and is not really keen on taking you into account, interestingly enough. Yeah. And that will play out a lot during this weekend. And so a good practice that we will do in a moment is to learn, because that we start with the end almost, and in a tantric tradition that fits well, by setting all things that appear to us free, deliberately freeing them from our presuppositions, freeing them from wanting them, not wanting them, or being indifferent to them. Simply being fully present to the present, whatever that is. And that is a very important practice to do. If we don't do that at the beginning of our meditation, we bring our problems with us. We bring our uncontrollable behavior with us. And then we end up struggling with it, which is not necessary. Yeah. So let's start with a comfortable position. And for those that are no longer 18, and I know that's just a few of us, kidding. Sitting comfortably above all means learning to listen to the body. Getting to know its bones, its muscles, its tendons. So we find a position that is easy to maintain. A position that doesn't require effort. but it allows us allows us to breathe freely and deep. To arrive in the present moment, it is helpful to point out to the mind that future and past simply do not exist. The future has not happened yet, and the past has ceased to exist. The only thing that we have is an endlessly unfolding present. And allow that awareness of the present to be fully open. And for a few minutes, we can practice not doing anything at all. Simply looking, observing what appears to us and how it appears to us. May there be sounds or feelings, images or thoughts. Then we can visit our individual consciousnesses one by one, deliberately setting whatever appears to that consciousness free. Neither wanting it nor not wanting it. Simply fully acknowledging that perception. Noticing that when we set whatever appears to us free from aversion and attachment, the mind becomes free immediately itself as well. So we can start with the seeing, and the hearing, the smelling and tasting. Tactile sensations. We can take a longer moment for the body, for it is often the victim of much pushing and pulling from our side, of much judgment. You can gently scan it from head to toe, setting it free with appreciation. And thus also becoming fully embodied. Thus helping the body to let go, to calm. And finally, we can offer the same service to the mind, being fully aware of how it feels, if it's clear or not, excited or not. Not wanting it to be different than it is. We experience for ourselves how remarkable the effect is of doing so. So that we can rest for a moment in the free space that this creates. Then we can slowly rise for meditation. One important thing to consider, this might be, well, there's many good places to start, but this is one of them. There's an inclination amongst Westerners, as we are goal-oriented, to always want to go for the highest practices findable, which is not really practical. But it causes us to underestimate practices that we do here. In fact, this practice I took from the Bahya Sutta, and the person that the Buddha explained this to became instantaneously enlightened. So if you could really do what I just showed you, you would have been free. That deep this practice is. Yeah. And what it does, and this will play a major role in the next year, the in-depth meditation training. This is a word that intrigues me more and more in Sanskrit is manasikara, not paying attention. To know that our mind adds all kinds of things to our perception that causes our minds to leave our circle of control, one could say, for the moment. So once these things appear to us unexamined, our mind pursues them on its own. In this case, to notice that our mind prejudges our perceptions. And we don't discern things neutrally, but in an egocentric way. And this is called improper attention. On the basis of identity and past experiences and so on and so forth. Some things appear very attractive to us, other things do not appear unattractive to us, and some things appear as not worthwhile of our attention at all. The latter ones are actually the most difficult to discern because our mind tends to ignore them altogether. So it's very important to learn to discern that the mind does that. And so, because of the moment one notices that, one finds the freedom to actively withdraw that improper attention. And the interesting thing is that if you leave these things intact, your mind will try to go back to them. So you have no control. You would like to do A, but because of that appearance, your mind will go back to it nevertheless. The same thing with your thoughts. So when a thought appears and somehow you indicate or you allow the mind to indicate that this thought is attractive or important or self for that matter, it will try to go back there. The moment you know that this is the case and you withdraw that aspect, the mind becomes immediately free floating from it. So you immediately have a measure of freedom. The mind is just hovering for a moment. Yeah. Does it make sense? Yeah. You were in India? Because it's neither yes or no. That is exactly the way it works in India. And so again, let's say that Tanka appears very attractive to me, or maybe not. Maybe I'm from the Theravada tradition and I don't like all these Buddha images. And so because of my identity, and it's not true by the way, but because of the identity, I might not like it. But then my mind keeps going back to it because it has judged it, and it attracts it therefore to keep thinking about this. This should not be the case. This is incorrect. This is not proper, and so on and so forth. So you get like a whole stream of thought where the mind keeps returning to the object. In this case, I dislike. Or maybe it is something that I want. It appears highly attractive to me. And then it starts to fantasize, like it would actually look much better in my room than here. Like, when everyone has left and Nina is about to take me home, I will say, like, give me a moment and I'll cook it. But we all know how this works, doesn't it? Yeah. So the mind starts to pursue it. So and it then tells you that it is you that is thinking that. But it's not the case. Because if you would try to stop it, you can't. And the more you allow the mind to do that, the more deeper it invests. In this case, the more attractive that thing starts to appear, the more thoughts will go there, the more attractive it appears, and so on and so forth. And so I get lost in a cascade of mental activity. And that is why when you have a conflict with a colleague and you lie in your bed, if you allow your negative thoughts to move on for 5 seconds, it's very difficult to get out, because it will start to paint an ever more evil appearance of your colleague. That gives you a better reason to complain about it, which perturbs the image even further, and so on and so forth. That is what improper attention does. The tanka is neither attractive nor non-attractive. It's not mine at all. It is simply what it is. And then I can choose. And I can say, maybe I appreciate it because it's valuable. It tells me something about who I am. But it also allows me to withdraw my attention if that is something that I would rather have at the moment. But I get choice. That makes better sense? Yes. So the trick is that we want freedom. And we want freedom over our intent. We want our intent to pursue that which is good for us to pursue, that brings calm and happiness, contentment. But desire, for example, does not allow you to be content. Contentment and desire are mutually exclusive, as the tradition would call it. You can be content or you can desire something, but not both at the same time. So I can be content here, or I can desire the tanka, but I cannot do both. And so desire appears to me as something that I would want. But when I check it, the results of desire are hardly unfortunate. I become discontent, and my mind starts to behave in manners that I can't control. And the longer I let this happen, the worse it becomes. And it's the same thing with anger. Now, when I'm sitting and meditating and I notice the sound of a car outside and I think, you have who's silly enough to build a meditation center at a place near a road, and then you get that endless blah 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 going on again. Yeah. And the moment you suck into that, you're gone. You end up in a simulation, and we will discuss in a moment that in these simulations we lose all control. There is no introspection. When you get sucked in, there's no way to question what is happening anymore. It looks personal. It's not. It's quite the opposite, actually. And that is important to see. This practice, what we just did, is so helpful and so healing. Actually, the day before yesterday, I was a bit tired. I went to Upaya Center nearby, Joan Halifax's, Roshi Joan Halifax's place. And she just had crazy practitioner, had 2 open heart surgeries, then immediately leaves to Japan to do something there for a compassion training. Fantastic. Yeah. I like powerful people in that sense. Yeah. But she needed some rest, so I was there early, and I had just asked to be able to look around. And I had my look around, and the place is not that big, so after half an hour I had seen everything. But I have a beautiful meditation place. And I was just a bit tired, and I just sat for 2 hours doing nothing but this. I just sit down and let go. And then the mind is just free floating. Then I don't need to go anywhere. I don't need to do anything. That free floatingness is then more than enough. The mind nicely calms, becomes absorbed in an open space. And you can just rest there. I needed some rest, so that is a beautiful place to rest. It was not the time to apply the 7-fold analysis of selflessness. It was not the moment to go there. Yeah. And so when you can do this, it gives you such a place of refuge in your life, because it means that you have a place where you can go, where you can deliberately go, where you are at ease, content, whole, safe. And so it's really worthwhile of your practice to cultivate this a lot. Moreover, I hope I made it clear now that if you wanted to go directly to your meditation object and you don't practice some letting go before, you end up being distracted all the time. Because when you come out of a busy day, and we all have complex lives, our mind is full of likes and dislikes. It's full of prejudice. It's full of judgment. And when you then try to sit down, all these ideas keep pulling at you. Your mind keeps going back to them. And this is frustrating. And then often we think like, well, I can't meditate, not today, and so on and so forth. The thing is that we just should have practiced a little bit of letting go in between. Yeah. And so finally, letting go here in this case is not a letting go of something. It's letting go of desire, aversion, and indifference, of paying attention to the world in unfortunate ways, to notice that it is the case and setting things free. The last one, I hope that you had some taste of it, is magic. The first time I encountered actually was one of my meditation teachers having a very interesting practice when the mind is completely unruly. She says, well, if you at one point are sitting and your mind really doesn't want to go anywhere, well, it wants to go everywhere, but apart from where you want it to go, then what you should do is to say to your mind, I will stop meditating now. Obviously, you need to be heard with me. I'm going to sit and I'm going to listen to you. So talk. And then obviously what it does is not talking at all. And that is the magic of it that many meditators miss. We look at the mind and we judge the mind, like, oh, that's way too excited, or that's way too dull, and so on and so forth. And then we start to wrestle with the mind, like, no, I should bring back my thoughts and whatever you have, and then that makes you only more nervous and more upset, and so on and so forth. Well, the trick is actually simply to learn to look. When you just look deeply at it, when you just observe it, everything stops. And the mind naturally comes to the middle ground. It finds its own balance between stability and clarity. Quiet by itself is nothing to do. So rather than forcing oneself to get there, it is learning to look in the right way, such as the mind responds to the way you look at it. Yeah. How is this possible? We will need a moment to explore. And so I hope it starts to make sense how this is the beginning of the practice. At the end, when we go back to Tara, is to see that all things do not exist as they appear. There's something wrong about their appearance. Once we see that things are not established by essence, that why they're not self-established, but dependently established, then that moment when you see things as they are, then equanimity is yours. Because then the illusion is broken. But we need to get there one step at a time. So far, that works? Yeah, that's pretty easy, no? Yeah. And that's as easy as meditation is. You sit down and you do nothing. Now you know what my life is. Yeah? I do nothing. That's why I became monastic. I thought that was a brilliant idea. Yeah. I've tried so much, and I thought, well, let's stop doing that. Yeah, yeah. But it's truly the case, and you will find out. And that's maybe something to throw in there as well. Is that it's extremely restorative. I fully agree with you. Practice some equanimity is nice. No dogs here. Yeah. Ah, something just came in. The enemy. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a good example of what your mind does when you see something you dislike. Your mind is. Yeah. But one thing to show as well, and that plays a broader role in our relationality with others. One thing that equanimity does as well is that it is a space of acknowledgement. And it's very important to understand. When I say it is a way of letting go, it is letting go of an egocentric attitude with regard to things. But we all know that we are so often seen from different perspectives, from unwholesome and self-centered perspectives by others. And we are seen as something that we ought to be for someone. And so many humans feel for that reason unacknowledged, not seen for just who they are. I remember the first time I encountered my own guru and after my ordination, the one thing that I marveled at and that I found worthwhile of investigating is that he looked at people not from wanting anything from them, but simply acknowledging their presence. Just a moment of attention fully given. That sounds easy, but we rarely do that. And we don't even do that with regard to our own mind and our own body, because we take them to be our possessions. So even our own mind and body feel very unacknowledged by us, is always judged. When you look, many of us, when we look deeply in the body, it feels heavily judged by being too small, too big, too fat or too thin, or whatever you have, not enough muscle or way too much muscle, whatever you have come up with according to cultural delusions. Yeah. And when I grew up, the six-pack was enough, but now you need to have an eight-pack. So you might have made all this effort in the gym, having six of them, and then someone walks in and says, and you feel not good enough once again. Or, and we do the same thing to our mind. There's always these things to live up to that it never can live up to. Yeah. And so to look with an equanimous attitude at the body and mind is surprising what it does to you in the long run. So to every time you go into meditation, to look at the body with equanimity and subsequently with appreciation and gratitude for all that it does is actually also a very good mechanism for physical health. For sure, we will get older and we will get sick, and one day this thing will go with in pension, and it has at one point the right to do so. But in the meanwhile, that relationality of equanimity and appreciation is very healthy. And it's nice the way the body responds to it. And as a meditator, when you want to go into deep concentration or deep absorption, you need that relationship. Yeah, you need to have the trust that your body will care for you when you're no longer aware of it. And that requires a lot of developing that relationship. And that is the same thing with regard to the mind. We need to learn to trust the mind. The mind pursues our happiness, but does not always know how to do that. But the first thing we need to establish and to have seen for ourselves is that it tries. And when we see it for what it is, it will calm on its own accord. So that is where all practice starts, learning simply to look without judgment, without wanting things to be different than they are. Then we have a starting freedom. And then we can start to work at the next thing that has already arisen. Yeah. And that is mindfulness. Terrible word, by the way. I know who came up with it, and I shall not judge him. Well, a little bit. Yeah. And empty mind might have been nicer, but yeah. Maybe let's look at it before I explain it. So all our sessions this weekend will always start by equanimity. You know now what it is. I don't need to explain it again and again. So let's first start with a few moments of letting go. Yeah. And if you're familiar with it, you can do it in a single go. Leaving all things in the present at peace. Thereby finding a peaceful abiding in the present ourselves. Let's stick with that open awareness for a moment that has thus opened up. In a relaxed manner. Try to stay attentive to it. But most probably distractions will arrive. Don't fight those distractions, but once you have noticed them, take a moment to acknowledge how it felt to be distracted. What did that look like? To then simply return to that equanimous, open awareness. Okay, thank you. We might end up with an enlightened dog. Yeah. What is the name of Deirdre's dog again? Micro Puppy, no? She told me today the story that the first time he came in, he prostrated. That's not bad for a dog. I mean, good imprints. Yeah. So when you looked, you saw it takes time to see deeply what is happening there. But one thing to notice that whenever you get distracted, or thinking for that matter, to heap them on or throw them on a one big heap for the moment, is that you notice that these are always thinking consciousnesses, mental minds. Yeah. You get sucked into some simulation rather than reality, isn't it? Yeah. It doesn't mean that all thinking is bad, but this type of uncontrolled thinking has great disadvantages. When you look deeply as well, you see that it has a sense of your awareness collapsing. When you are mindful, there's like spaciousness. It's like a broad sense of awareness. And the moment it collapses, or the moment you get distracted, your awareness seems to collapse into something that feels narrow and darker. Yeah. That has to do with the fact that your mindfulness brings all kinds of factors with it that allow you to explore what is here. You are introspective, you are self-aware. But the moment you become distracted or the mind starts to sink, that introspectiveness is lost. You get truly sucked into like a movie. Something unfolds in and of itself. As there is no introspective awareness in it, that creates that sense of narrowness and sense of darkness. Yeah. You might have noticed also that with that lack of introspectiveness, you have no control over the content. You don't actually even, as long as you're in, you don't know that you're in. Until by cultivation, your introspection all of a sudden intervenes. That's what we try to, one of the things that we try to cultivate, that our introspection becomes capable of protecting us. That it more and more actively engages. Yeah. And that these distractions on both sides, both dullness and distractedness, are, how do you call this, are like spirals, are like you are sucked into, they are self-reinforcing. What happens deepens itself on its own. And so the longer you let it go, the deeper you get sucked into that. And when the mind starts to feel a little bit heavy and you indulge in it, you very quickly descend into lethargy and even sleep. If you allow it, if for a moment you think like, oh, this is actually a bit nice, and gone. Yeah. Yeah. Or for a moment when the mind indulges in this whatever fantasy is passing by, you get sucked in ever deeper into that movie. Yeah. So both these practices, both these activities of the mind are self-sustaining, lack introspection or block out introspection and all the good qualities that it brings. And very importantly, and then we come for a moment, if I have time, the better definition of mindfulness is that you lose self-awareness. You are not aware of you. You lose personhood. You become as interesting as your television or YouTube or Facebook. Well, I think actually YouTube is sometimes more interesting. It depends on what you watch. Yeah, I have YouTube, and if you open it, you know exactly what I watch. Too many downloads, documentaries, like nothing but Buddhist monks and nuns. Yeah. Yeah, one channel about computers from the 80s, but here we are. Even monks would need to have their little vices. Yeah. But I play out something importantly, is that I think one of the nice ways to think about Buddhahood is to think about the perfection of personhood. And I take that actually from a great philosopher that's fled from Nazi Germany into the United States, Hannah Arendt, that you might know, however you pronounce her name. Whenever I hear Americans pronounce her name, this sounds like awkward. Hannah Arendt, maybe. It's actually much more fun in France. I remember one point people drove me, I taught for a while in Monaco. I remember the first time we drove there, I drove with a bunch of French people. And then the person sitting next to me started to tell a whole story about Grace Kelly, as though I should know who that is. It took me really 10 minutes to figure out that was Grace Kelly. And ever since I have endless fun with this, Sylvester, Stallone. In French, you can make everything sound very interesting. Arnold, Schwarzenegger. Anyway. No, Hannah Arendt wrote a very important book on the Eichmann processes. She, of course, managed to fled the concentration camps and then ended up being a refuge here in New York. And when the war was over, she felt, as many did, guilty for being here and not with the rest of her people. So while her family was being gassed and shot, she was in an apartment in New York. And so when Eichmann was caught in Argentina and brought to Jerusalem to be tried there, she wanted to see the beast. And and that is, I think, heavily misinterpreted. But she was in a way, how should I say this? She was horrified by the fact that she did not find the beast. That she found an absolute mediocre no one that was constantly wiping his nose because he had the flu. Yeah. She had expected like some genius of the Holocaust. And this guy was just no one. And then she says something, and there's a lot to be said and discovered here. So I don't want to make this into a black and white story, but there's one important thing that she gets out of this. At one point, she makes the remark that he refused to think for himself. He refused to use introspection. He just followed his impulses. And his impulses were, as many of us do, his problem was that he did not feel good enough, as many do. And I don't need to tell you, when one gaze at our modern politics across the world is politics of not being good enough and then trying to compensate. And that is what he did. And he found a Nazi party, he found the SS to compensate, and they gave him an important job. And that was so important to how do you say this, to soften his need, his inner hurt, that he refused, that he could not question it. And then gradually, increasingly descended into horrible behavior. And I think that argument that he was a non-person is a very important one. We all risk that. In fact, we encounter that relatively often. But the moment we are mindful, the moment we attend to the present and we are introspective, we become persons. Because then we can question, like, is what I'm seeing right or not? Is this going to lead to my well-being, to your well-being, or not? That gives me choice. And from choice follows freedom. For freedom, you need choice, at least where we are. You will see in the end, you don't need choice, but that is the far end. Tara, who knows that she's an illusion, doesn't need choice. But we do. That's why we become persons. And so mindfulness, the main, Thich Nhat Hanh often calls mindfulness simply life, which is a very good translation of that term. But it actually in reality means memory. But the Indian idea of memory is much broader than our understanding of memory. But to say it as simple as possible, it means that, for one thing, we remember the present rather than getting sucked into fantasy. Yeah. And in that present, we remember who we are, not as an ego, but as what is a beautiful term, as an ethical person, an ethical identity, to take a term from a great Canadian philosopher, Charles Taylor. At the moment we can question the content of our mind and who we are in relationship to others, we become persons. And that is an important function of mindfulness. When we are mindful, we are temporarily protected by equanimity. That means what we observe in wholesome ways. We don't pay improper attention. We let things be as they are. And within that, we can navigate freely. And that is what freedom means. That is what we bring to perfection in awakening. That is what the awakening factors are for. Yeah. And so to lose our mindfulness, the opposite of mindfulness for that reason is forgetfulness. And it is interesting to see for yourself that forgetfulness forgets you. It leaves you easily behind to be sucked in whatever it comes up with. And that is not a place to be. Yeah. And so the importance is to learn to see that. And so when you meditate, often we are instructed that to endlessly bring back our intention and so on and so forth. But this is quite self-defeating in a way. Because then you have already a judgmental awareness, and then you judge the fact that you have a judgmental awareness. And then if you do a really good job, then you can judge the fact that you were judgmental about your judgmental awareness and so on and so forth. And we do that all the time. You get angry, then you get angry with the fact that you became angry again, then you become angry. And so, we have this endless sort of like infinite regress of sinking away in whatever. We always get into the same thing. And you want to stay out. So to do judge and to force and to enforce and to impose is not a good strategy for any meditator. What you want to be able to do is to see. The seeing is enough. You want introspection to recognize this is unfreedom. I don't want to be there. That's dangerous. It feeds itself. And sometimes these thoughts can seem amusing, but once you feed the beast, remember that depression is also simply a very bad form of distraction. It's just thought going rampant. So the price that you pay sometimes for indulging in pleasant thought can be disastrous when the cause of that rampant thought is an unpleasant phenomenon. Yeah. So you're indulgent in pleasurable fantasy in the present can turn badly against you. Yeah. But moreover, again, the marvel is here and not in my thinking about the here. Yeah. And again, there is place for thinking. The thinking should be used judicially, but that is, thinking is very important, especially in this tradition. That is why we use philosophy so much. But it should not never get out of control. And so to see the difference between the two is to have started a meditative practice. You deeply look and you keep looking. And when you see unfreedom, when you know it to be unfreedom, the mind jumps away from it quite by itself. It knows this is dangerous. And when you're mindful, you are fully aware of being mindful, you know, this is freedom. I'm content. Nothing is pulling at me. I'm home. I'm safe. Here, I'm good enough. Everything is good enough. Here, I'm resting. I'm happy. I replenish myself. And so to simply know the contrast will, in time, transform your whole meditative practice. You just keep looking and noticing. And at one point, the mind will become so convinced by direct experience that it will stop being distracted. It loves staying with the meditative object. Like this is nice. This is where I want to be. So far, so good. Does I leave anything unanswered? Do you have distracting thoughts about what I just said? Yes. Can happen. Yeah. So again, don't use judgment. Again, also here I find humor very helpful. So especially at the beginning of my own practice, my mind has a habit of being very heavy-handed, and I found humor to be such a valuable tool. And when the mind gets distracted and you see it doing its own nonsense again, just have a big smile and think like, yeah, we're not doing that again. Like, bye-bye. And so to have that sort of light-footed, light-hearted attitude is also very helpful. So not to use judgment, but the judgment is always a story about I am like that. This is like that. So rather than judgment, to use insight. This is an unwholesome state. Here I'm not free. The mind forgot me. It behaves completely uncontrollable. This is not a safe space. This is why I'm not alive. And then to come back like mindfulness and to know what it is, to know how rewarding, how rich, how full of texture that is. And that it gives you your existence. For some of you, to really sell it to you. Some of you heard this before, but some things are worth repeating, as you undoubtedly know by now. But now we all have this memory, that when we were kids, in Holland, you have 6 weeks of holiday. I mean, I don't know how this works in the United States when you're a kid. I mean, you have probably 2 days. But anyway, I come from a different planet on the other side of the Atlantic. And so as a kid, we had 6 weeks of school holidays. And I have these memories of these school holidays being, to my perception, so long that at the end of the holiday, I forgot that I was ever at school to begin with. No, these are oceans of time. But kids must be mindful a lot because the world is new to them. They must be mindful to explore because whatever they encounter that is new to them, they must ask like, what is this? How do I navigate this? And so they are, let's say, biologically relatively mindful because, well, everything is new to be learned. But the older we get, the more we believe that we have seen things before. And we start to rely more and more on secondhand thought about things. And the untrained mind rarely looks at the people around us like, oh, I know you. We often just look just enough to be able to recognize who that person is, and then we're already back to judging regarding our stories about the person in front of us. And we all fall into this trap. This is natural. This is also sort of almost half demanded by our society. Luckily, I met the Dharma quite early on, but even then it can be quite a challenge. I needed to practice partially without a community to practice, which is hard to do. And so that you must make all the mistakes on your own and find your way out of them once again. But especially in my monastic life, luckily I met good teachers that were good advice with regard to how to train. When I look back at my own, or when I observe my own lived experience now after 20 years of monastic life, I am back to where I've started. Now I had a month of retreat. And then at the end of the month of the retreat, there's almost like a shock. It's true, I'm teaching as well. And I mean, I need to, the period of time seems so vast. A whole month is an infinity, after which you fall into another infinity. No, and that my retreat is just 2 months ago, but it could have been 10 years because I was fully present to to New York and to the West Coast, the Bay Area, and now being here. Your mind becomes childlike again in that aspect. It's fully engaged with life. Now we always complain that we get older, time speeds up, but this is not a natural thing. It speeds up because we get lost in distraction. We get lost in dullness. But if you train mindfulness, that childlike attitude of the mind comes back quite by itself. And if nothing else, that is extremely rewarding to live like that. Yeah. Because then you truly live for 1,000 years. Yeah. And I would like to recite the end verses of Shantideva on page. Oh, that's the wrong prayer. That's really nice. I am trying to figure that out. On page 11. Just the Shantideva prayers we will do. Maybe let's start with the dedicating the merits, and then, well, I will tell you where we stop. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Freedom is overrated. May whatever virtue we have collected benefit the teachings and all transmigratory beings, and may it especially cause the essence of perfect pure Losang Dharpa's teachings to shine forever. May all sentient beings be graced with the bodhisattva way of life by the virtue we have obtained while practicing the bodhisattva's path. Through our merit, may all those in all directions who are afflicted by bodily and mental sufferings obtain oceans of joy and contentment. As long as the cycle of existence lasts, may their happiness never decline. May the world attain the constant joy of the bodhisattvas. Through this merit of ours, may all beings, without exception, abstain from every vice and always engage in virtue, not lacking the spirit of awakening, devoted to the bodhisattva way of life, embraced by the Buddhas and freed of the deeds of Maras. May monasteries be well established, full of chanting and study. May there always be harmony among the Sangha, and may the purpose of the Sangha be accomplished. May the Bodhisattva's wishes for the welfare of the world be fulfilled, and whatever the protector's intent for sentient beings, may that be accomplished. May the Pratyeka Buddhas and Stravakas be happy, always worshipped by the lofty gods, assurers, and humans. May we live endowed with strength in whatever posture we are. In all our lives, may we find plentiful places of solitude. When we wish to see or ask something, we will see the protector Manyuta himself without any impediment. May our way of life be like that of Manjushri, who lives to accomplish the benefit of all sentient beings throughout the 10 directions. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may we too remain and dispel the miseries of this world. And I'm pretty sure we accomplished at least some of that goal. Yeah. For we exist interconnected with others. So the practice is to practice with all living beings. Yeah. May they find comfort by being with us. So thank you for this evening. One remark, therefore, tomorrow morning from 8:30 to 11, we'll do 10:45 so that we have a little break before we continue. That will be a full-on argument. If you're not fully aware, well, it's just to warn you. A good way to think always about it, I got actually from a Tibetan teacher when I, at one point at the beginning of my monastic career, attended teachings of His Holiness. And I was in Drapu Monastery in southern India, and His Holiness was giving a commentary on the chanting the names of Manjushri and the Kuya Samaya Tantra. If you don't think what that, if you think like I have no idea what that means, yeah, that was me too in that moment. And I thought I understood the first sentence, and then with the second sentence, I realized I misunderstood the first sentence, because the second sentence did not mean anything with regard to what I thought he had said with the first sentence. And then there was another 2.5 hours of talking coming my way, and I just sat there, and the environment was magnificent. So, and to sit with His Holiness is always impressive. And but Westerners are always embarrassingly sitting up front because we all need translation. And so towards the end of the 2.5 hours, His Holiness leaves, and I turned to one of the Tibetans sitting next to me and said, "Did you understand that?" And he said, "No, but it was beautiful, wasn't it?" And I thought that was such a wonderful attitude, because His Holiness is extravagant in his brilliance, his intelligence, his understanding. The way he navigates these things are incomparable. So even when you don't understand a word of what he's saying, it still sounds pretty awesome. And I had never heard of either text, let alone a comparison of the two. Yeah, for those that practice Tantra, he started to talk about karma yoga, which in that case means something very different from what you think it means, which became very clear with the second sentence. And so, tomorrow morning, I would say you're well invited to come. If you don't come, make sense of everything, then please just enjoy the arguments. Yeah. We are quite advancing well in the training. And it is a difficult argument, but it is also very important and a very beautiful argument. Yeah. And then later on the day, while practicing some investigation and so on and so forth, I will show you some of the aspects of why this works as well. Not as deep as we will do in that meditation training, but I will give you a good taste of what that means. what it means to be like Tara in the world. Yeah. And to know that they see you as in a way that is unreal, but in effect, it is the perfection of personhood. So I wish you auspicious dreams and stuff. Yeah. Wonderful to be here with you, and some coming from very far, or from very far in time. Good to see you. Practicing together is so much more fun, isn't it?